So I hope that you've had a chance to check out the beautiful Ink Rhapsody exhibition downstairs in the Joylight Gallery. If not, make sure you get down to see it. It is really remarkable. So please do. This wonderful exhibition closes on October 26th, so make sure you have a chance to explore it. And next Thursday evening, you're going to have the opportunity to dive a little bit more deeply into this exhibition with our gallery gathering on one of the remarkable works included in the show, Liu Guosong's Witch's Earth number 42, which is going to be led by a KIA docent. So we're very excited about that. We hope that you'll also join us for our next ArtBreak on September 10th, when artist Chris Walker discusses art in the 21st century and offers practical guidance on using digital tools to enhance visual art. You can find more information about these and lots of other programs on our website. And I also encourage you to grab a flyer on your way out from our side table over here. Now it is my absolute honor to introduce today's speaker, artist Julia Wang, who is a highly talented local artist and educator who is herself a fourth-generation disciple of the Lingnan School. So very excited to get her perspectives here today. In both her painting and her teaching, she bridges the traditional and modern with an openness that engages diverse forms of Western and Asian art. Proficient in both classical Chinese painting and Western oil painting, she teaches audiences of all ages and backgrounds. And speaking of her teaching, I should mention that Julia will be leading a workshop in Chinese ink painting here at the KIA on September 18th from 6 to 8 p.m. This exciting workshop is already sold out, but if you're interested in getting onto a waiting list, please see me after the program today or email us at museumed@kiarts.org, and we would be happy to put you on that waiting list. With all of that said, please join me in welcoming Julia Wang.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. It is my pleasure to be here to really talk to you guys about the art school that I'm associated with and whom I benefited greatly from. So a little bit about myself. I originally was born in Beijing, China. I moved here in the early 90s. So I was really fully somewhat raised in America, but I always felt like I have a strong connection to my motherland, and I was really very, very happy to have met a master at Lingnan School who was highly influential in the Chicago area, who gave me this connection, and it allowed me to learn a great deal about the discipline, the history, and the background. So today, after seeing the show hosted by Joy's gallery downstairs, I'm just really happy to kind of come here and share a little about the background and history of the Lingnan School and its cultural and social influences. So I created a show here just to start with. So this is our title, The History and Importance of the Lingnan Painting School. As you all know, China is a really diverse, large nation, right? And it has many, many different areas and provinces. And the Lingnan School really, it is very particular to the southern region of China near the Guangzhou or Canton province. And many of the artists, or if not all of them, are pretty much originated from that area. And because southern China, especially Canton, was highly open and business oriented, they really have an early history, a lot of cultural exchange with foreign countries such as Europe, America, Japan, etc. So they have played a really key role in transforming modern Chinese art with the ability to incorporate various types of elements from various nations and cultural backgrounds. So first, I'm going to give an introduction to the type of Chinese paintings throughout history, a little background of the Lingnan School, and then history and the formation of this particular trend of art, as well as the characteristics of the artists of this school and some key figures or artists of the Lingnan School. So many of you I've heard are enthusiasts of East Asian painting. And when we speak of East Asian painting, we first think of China being the origination of many of these ancient forms of art. To give everybody a really brief summary, there are 3 different types of paintings in China. 3 different, very significantly different techniques here. The first one, it is called the meticulous painting, which is kind of symbolized or characteristic with the fine lines, such as what you see here on the left side, fine lines, very detailed, realistic rendering of the natural objects, and a lot of heavy color and pigmentation. So this particular school was really used in the earlier times of the history, because that is when China first started its painting tradition with caves and murals. And back then they used a lot of really heavy mineral type of paints. So this is the first formation. And then originally they painted a lot on silk, traditionally. Although China invented paper, silk was the primary form of underlaying a material, because it is really thoroughly made with a sturdy structure, very durable, very easy to use, very smooth. So in this time period, they used a lot of the fine lines, highly detailed renderings of the painting. So this is where all this, what they call bird and flower painting, originated from, this root, this traditional form. And then, as we know that there's another painting style called the Mo, which means, I don't know whether I translate correctly, it is called boneless. Boneless, it sounds kind of funny, right? But really what it means is that instead of using these rigid line work that outlines the painting and subject, it is really based on a use of form, use of shapes, a lot similar to watercolor, where they do not really use the line work to outline the object. It's based on color, use of color, gradation, pigments that are used in a very fluid way. Yeah. However, the structure or the anatomy or the basic form of the botany is also based on realism. They basically put some structural drawings in there, underneath, and then they kind of paint over it, mostly rendering the essential form, colors. And this is done in a kind of impromptu manner in comparison to this type, which is carefully planned step by step. And then the third type, which is even more evolved, is this type, which is called the freestyle. In Chinese, we call it 写意. 写 means to write or script. 意 means the essence or the nature of the painting. So this form, which came later, has captured the essential character of the Chinese paintings. Really, it is not about rendering a realistic object or subject, but rather bring out the life, the spiritual essence of the objects, whether it's plant, whether it's any kind of a nature object. And then this is a in-between form, the freestyle, as well as a slightly more concrete-based style. So there's many different varieties of art, but these 3 are the most commonly seen type of painting techniques in Chinese history. Yeah. So speaking of these meticulous painting, which I pointed out earlier, there's a really important time in Chinese history. So basically, this time period that reached the peak of Chinese flower and birds painting, it is around 900 AD. In China, we call it the Song Dynasty, which is equivalent to kind of medieval Europe times. In China, it was a time when there was a flourish of culture, of art, history, painting. And one of the major form of art has developed around this time. So it focuses it is around 980 when artists approach painting realistically and botanical subjects with an eye on the imitation of nature with fine lines and forms, focusing on the essence and nature of the objects. The images are highly realistic and utilize line work. So as you can see, this is a very typical courtly style painting around the Song Dynasty. And so there's a story behind why this time became a really highly flourished period. One of the emperors of the Song Dynasty, whose name was Guizong, he was a really talented painter himself. So with a lot of his duties as emperor, besides what he does in the office, he really spends a majority of time forming a Chinese imperial court academy, which is called the Xuanhe Academy. So in there, he has really educated a lot of very talented artists who painted this very detailed manner. So now when we look back, these are not precise paintings like we do in Western art where realism, perspective, all that is taken into consideration. But what they do is they kind of have a sense of capturing the critical elements of nature. And they believed back then that by understanding with depth of the nature's elements, they feel like there's a connection to the universe, to the cosmos. And they feel that having the deepening understanding of science at that time will really connect them closer to the orders of the universe. And this is highly pretty much expressed here in these paintings here. So there's a lot of attention to detailing, to the structure of the birds, the elements. And then there's a sense of poetry behind all these paintings because the emperor really himself promotes a more so than the crafts of painting, a sense of self-expression in a poetic backdrop. Yeah. So I talked about it here. Majority of this has been commissioned under Huizong, and he established Lingnan School. Objects include mostly forms of birds, insects, plants, small animals. The nature of art is decorative with poetic sense. This is removed from earlier times where these techniques are heavily focused on religious objects. The aim is to depict the pleasure of the natural surroundings. So before the bird and flower painting became a significant type of genre in Chinese painting, a lot is focused on religious art, such as Buddhism, which came to China from India, and then they were really fully focused on figurative paintings back in the murals commissioned by emperors and priests. But back then, this was a time period where there's more secular objects. People focus a little more on nature. They focus a little more on maybe secular figurative drawings, paintings. So the reason I talk about this school is that they were the laying foundation of what today we see a lot as Chinese bird and flower painting. So among the school of this time around, both the meticulous style and Mo, which is a simplified version, there are two basic styles. One of which is a rich, elaborative style, seen here, with heavy color, with a lot of very heavy pigments. And in China, we call this 重彩, meaning heavy pigment. They use things like oyster shells, like some really heavy minerals. A lot of this is not transparent, and they cover it thoroughly. Although they do have an interplay of transparent colors, which is more like natural plants, diluted a lot more with water, so giving it that light feel. And this one is a more what they call freestyle. Like I mentioned earlier, some people call it wild and free, because really what this does is that this is a kind of descriptive painting. There's a sense of free-flowing quality on the spot without a whole deal of planning, but it really depicts the essence of the plants painting. So this is a more sketchy style, sketch-like style of the time. Yeah, both of these are from the Mo, which is not that highly realistic courtly painting, but rather than a more simplified And this Mogu style or Boma style is heavily related to our founders of the Lingnan School. Like art before, there's a sense of control, but evolving into a more free-flowing approach that leads it into the Mogu or Boma style. That is shape-based rather than line work-based style, and became popular among flower and bird painters. So those really elaborative painters, they now realize there's a new way they can go from. They can really become a more free forming type of artist, doing things that doesn't require as much tedious tedious labor, and is more freely expressive. And it's really popular. It's incorporated the taste of the literati class and freed itself from the traditional artisan style, which emphasizes realism and meticulous finish of art. It uses brushstrokes to create movement in objects. So this really is kind of evolving a little more into a spontaneous activity, and popular among the literati, who are like court officials who take art as a amateur profession, during their leisure times, where because most of them are really highly learned, they know the classics really well, they all write poetry, and with them, they do not have a lot of time to really create an artisan style, and then they took it into the next level. It's sort of like a self, expressive style, and that gives them a chance to be artists, really. So among the Mogu painting, the boneless painting, there's a really key figure in the Ming Dynasty time, which is about 500 years from now. That is the time when art has really became a really sophisticated, advanced painting like technique of that time. And then among there's a famous painter called the Yun Shouping. This is an artist in the late Ming Dynasty in the Jiangsu province. So Jiangsu is the central area near Shanghai, near Suzhou, near the Yangtze River region, which is really fertile. The weather is really mild, and from there's a lot of great varied plants, and it is very, very good inspiration for painters and poets at that time. So he's very notable of his paintings of peonies and various types of subjects. He has achieved a balance between the control form, like realism, really good understanding of the basic structure of the elements, as well as control form with some level of realism, as well as spontaneity expressed with the control of the materials, such as water, such as the pigments, which kind of occur in a very kind of like natural way, but basically played a lot with the water, the use of water, the pigments, and the simple shapes as outlines, as well as the expression of color that naturally transition into adjacent areas. For instance, a lot of times they will just paint on the spot. They have a draft underneath, and they basically it works like Western watercolor, where you don't know exactly what things are going to appear, but you have a sense of control of what you want it to be, and you let the water flow and collide with the colors to kind of generate a lot of certain unexpected effects. So this is becoming part of that. So that's why they call it Mogu. It is not highly processed. It is partially processed and partially free, carefree. And this is definitely, compared to this is far more planned, and this is more ornate. This take a lot deal of control, understanding of layering of color, help the application of color, and this takes some planning. Although the end result is a really well-balanced, free flowing, as well as a delicate appearance of this subject.
What do the words say?
The words they mostly talk about what the artists have experienced around that time frame in their life. What is their living condition, where they are, or they was at a certain city. Sometimes they will put some poems of their own. Yes. So it's basically like for artists, like a diary, writing down your conditions. What did I experience that day, the temperature, the season, things like that. And many of them are well versed in poetry. Now, how is that related to our topic, our Lingnan School topic? So the art of these time periods have influenced two, what I call ancestors of the Lingnan School. They're a pair of brothers with the name of Ju Chao and Julia, which are these two gentlemen there. So these artists are originally from the Canton area, southern China. Another name for this area is called Lingnan, and the area is south of 5 major mountains in the southern areas of the Zhujiang River. So Ling, the word in Chinese, Ling, it means mountains. So Lingnan means south of these 5 major mountains. So this is where, they have identified themselves as by the region of their homes. So they lived in the late Qing dynasty, which is the last Zhou dynasty. They were artists who drew a lot of inspiration from artist Yun Shouping, which I've shared previously to this. So there's inherited fine line and detailed qualities, focusing on very fine details, which is a typical character of Ming era. So these artists, really, they've learned a lot from the master of the past of the Ming dynasty, which is really a very strict type of art, as I shown earlier. But around this time, same time, the styles of literati artists were also incorporated. So they're represented by natural, essential sketch-like quality, freeing from a more formalistic quality, which is often used by the literati, which I've talked about previously, who are mostly amateur painters who serve as public officials, who are educated and great poets and writers. So these literati artists focus more on essential subjective, I wrote it wrong, expression than the realistic study of objects, which the painting of Song dynasty focused on expressing. So it goes from very realistic to a little bit more impressionistic now. So these are the two gentlemen. They live around 1828 to 1904. Innovative professional flower painters and teachers of these artists. They have been deeply involved in the learning from the artists of the Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces. This is an era here, a post-Ming era. So some of their ancestry came from the Yangtze River, so that's why they drew a lot of kind of inspiration from the artists of that time. They feel there's a connection. Lingnan is more southern China, it's a little more tropical-like, whereas the Jiangsu province near the Yangtze River is mild in the temperature and climate. So the expression and feel is different, which you will see later in the Lingnan School artists. So here are some of the innovation by these two artists, whom people call ancestors. Their key techniques developed art methods of fusing and colliding of water in painting. So as I shown earlier, there's this watercolor-like technique, which partly is very controlled by cartoon lines, partly it is very free-flowing and kind of done by a spontaneous brushwork, I would call it, not brushstroke, because around this time they not really yet incorporated that level of calligraphy into painting as much as later on. So this is one technique where the water plays a key role in here. A lot like Western watercolor, but it's done on silk and also coated rice paper. When I say coated rice paper, I mean it is coated with alum to give it that waterproof quality. So we do not want the water to seep into the rice paper, but actually spreads like a basically similar effect of a also treated silk, which is not penetrating through the surface of the paper rather than having it being a waterproof surface to paint on. Another technique is the fusing and colliding of pigments, especially that of opaque colors. So basically they'll have two areas of pigments somewhere, and then occasionally they have one major color tone, and then they would bring in maybe a few other things, creating this gradation naturally by dropping the pigments, the kind of thick pigments into water, either diluting or not diluting. This is a play of wet on wet, basically, like what we do here in the West. It's like a wet on wet, but with heavy, thick pigments. Yeah. So in Chinese, we call it 状粉, meaning the gliding of powder-like pigments, which is white in particular, because this is not transparent, whereas some of these other colors, they're more or less on the transparent side. So some of our Chinese natural pigments are extractions of plants, while some are from stones or some sort of a mineral. So they have a varying level of transparency. And then that is how they are used for different purposes. So this is another very water-like type of study here. So you can see he has a really good skill of showing the shapes, but at the same time, he let go of, when he dropped in the paint into the controlled zones of the drawings. Same thing here. You can see this is really watercolor-like. And from there on, we can see a lot of lights of modern painting throughout these two artists. Okay, so here are some basic mobile techniques. I don't know if anyone is curious about this, but this is pretty critical to Chinese painting, especially in the near modern era. So their techniques are developed. There's several methods here. Layering, using various layers, depth, degree of darkness to create this very atmospheric feel. So this, we can think about in Western painting where we do things in layers. A lot of times we create this very depth revealing feel that gives the atmosphere of the plant or object. Second one, which is shown here, is called dotting. I call it pointillism, but in reality is not as intense as the pointillism we see in Impressionism. What it is they use drops of water, just they dab it in to create some elements, some backdrops or some basic portrayal of plants and faded in objects. So they use little shapes to create a bigger shape. Flat painting, which is really just filling colors, basically. It's really basic, nothing more than that. But among here, you can have some variants of darkness, lightness, various type of fluidity of the paint, color, shade. This is a more simplified form of art. The other one is what they call spreading, or I explain as gradation. So what you would do is you would drop some paintings, and then you would have two brushes on hand. One, which is just a pigment applying. You drop your heavy paint here, and then the other brush is a clean brush, diluted with water to kind of spread the paint around a little, to create these depth spaces, darkness to lightness. So this is another common technique. Now there's a few more here. Here, the first one here, I call it what they call connection colors. So you have several patches of color, they're laying next to each other, and they gradually kind of roll into each other, creating this really natural effect. You're drawing a plant here, a fruit here, and a lot of times in nature we see a ripening plant have various shades of, either cool tones or dark tones or warm tones, right? Like, have you seen pomegranate? Some parts of it is really red, some part is a little bit more fainted red, Same thing with leaves. In autumn, we have our, especially in autumn season here in Michigan, which is filled with beautiful autumn scenes, is that the green gradually transforms into red. So this is done simultaneously, and this is really very watercolor-like, and I really think this is a great way of approaching it. So here is color colliding, like I mentioned before in the previous summation. Same thing here, really, you just have several drops of, it says here, 2 type of drops naturally kind of blend into each other. They did not really make an intentional effort, but they kind of planned out where to put their colors and let it blend in next to each other. So these two are somewhat similar. They just maybe use different degree of tones. Here is what they call ink lighting. So a lot of times the Chinese artists, they are really minimalist painters. They do not use a whole lot of color, but ink is one of those neutral colors that brings everything together. And so a lot of times some drops of ink go into some edges or little parts, really kind of brings it out, and it ties to the calligraphy really well, because the ink medium is an essential part of the Chinese aesthetics, both in landscape painting and flower and birds painting. And it ties really, really well with the calligraphy, with a lot of type of script, sketch-like scriptive quality of the art. Here, this is a very interesting technique, is that a lot of times they use really, really thick concentrated paint, such as these things, the stainless. They bring it in some critical little parts. And because they're so thick, they create a really thick relief-like quality into the painting. So you can see little bumps on the painting. And sometimes from the side or from away, it really jumps out at you, and it kind of creates that layer of detail and textural play on the painting surface. Okay. So now, here are these two masters, Ju Chao, Julian. They were in their home studio, which is called the Garden of 10 Fragrances, 10香园 in Chinese, in Guangzhou province, Guangzhou city, where they gather with their students. They have numerous disciples here, and this is a painting in the a picture of the late Qing dynasty, before the Qing dynasty ends, Guangxu era. Guangxu is the second to last emperor of China, who is in the late 19th century, and this is a place where the Ju master taught their 3 founders of Lingnan School. So they set the tone before the Lingnan School actually come into existence. They were the foundations, but they taught those 3 Lingnan masters. So the 10 Fragrant Gardens stood in Guangzhou as a historic site museum these days. So they really transformed this into a museum. Sometimes they keep old parts of things and have display of artifacts and historical objects in there. So some of the 3 major founders of the Lingnan School is in this particular photograph. So here are our founders of the Lingnan School, inheritors of the Ju brothers' traditions. So you can tell these 3 gentlemen are in modern outfits, and they kind of were born in the late 1800s, and then died in the early 1900s, right? So the first one, Gao Jianfu, this is a leading painter who inherited directly from the Ju brothers in Guangzhou, Canton province. He was a key figure who directed the eclectic painting school. So the Lingnan School is also called the eclectic painting school. And why is it called that? I'm going to talk about that soon, because this is as some of you know, that you've probably seen a lot of Chinese art somewhere, but this school in particular has really modernized Chinese painting, with a lot of their own philosophies. So Gao Qifeng, this is his younger brother. He's a highly prolific painter, teacher of painters, including Zhao Shaoang, which is the painter I will talk about. So this is a really good teacher with a lot of disciples and students. So this is the big brother who founded the school with the main principles. This is a guy that carries a lot through teaching. And Chen Shuren, his art is a more poetic, expressive style with modern qualities. So this guy kind of has a more little modern appeal, and he did not have as many students, but he does have a very unique design, like an artistic style. So these are the 3 founders of the Lingnan School who studied in Japan, 1906 to 1911. and they participated in the Republican Revolution of 1911. So as you know, the China has been long a really long authoritarian state with the emperor at the middle of centralizing power, right? So, but later on today, we live in a China that is whether it's mainland or Taiwan, they were founded by revolutions who created the republic of that nation without the emperor, without the centralized type of inherent power. So although being artists, they were involved in the modern revolution of China. So here's Gao Jianfu, his basic philosophy. So integration of Chinese and foreign artistic tradition, future and gather modern ancient. These are the two key, basically two key philosophies, principles, which in Chinese are written as 折中古中外，融会古今, is basically eclectic of Chinese and foreign art and the collection of present and past. In essence, the Lingnan School is also considered a revolution in the movement of near-modern Chinese art, in which foreign elements of Western art and some Japanese influence were incorporated into their styles. So, oh, sorry. Oh, did I get the wrong one? Okay. So here are the a further explanation of this. Four main focuses. Revolution thinking. They like to evolve their thoughts, artistic principles. So instead of basing on copying masters that came in generations, they like to think on their own. And this is really having to deal with a lot of this type of feel of democracy and the feel of kind of being independent from a traditional group of people, just being more individualistic. So spirit of the time is what they focus on. They follow the transformation of times. So if there's industrialization, if there's change of times, their art reflect that spirit or that kind of appeal in their artistic expression. For instance, they will do a lot of painting of the traditional subjects like flower and birds, landscape. At the same time, they will paint about war, about soldiers, about like workers or any kind of that. They will reflect their concerns about their social environment. All incorporating spirit. This allows greater depth and new infiltration of thoughts and thinking. So they draw a lot of ideas from different type of progressive thinkers at that time. Fourth, new creation, breaking away from fixed ideas. Unlike the art of the past, like the personal freedom, which was breaking from tradition of copying and following fixed rules, which is deadening art at that time. So by copying over and over, there's no life. Everything is based on a prototype without independent thinking. So they like to break away from that mode. Basically in China, the principal form is still copying a lot from old masters, but around this time, because of their free thinking, their independent thinking, they're kind of more judging things with their own eyes and their own perspectives. And they kind of push that into teaching their students to think the same way, with the same kind of attitude. So what's the uniqueness about time period? So this is the revolutionary. So this is the founder of the modern day China's republic. His name is Sun Yat-sen. He was a person who studied in Honolulu, America, and he gotten a lot of independent ideas of, basically foreign American thoughts in political realm. And that Gao, the bigger brother there, he was studying as an artist in Japan. He followed Japanese masters at the time of Westernization in the East. Japan rapidly absorbed Western influences in art during the industrialization era. Prior to this, China was a source of artistic tradition in Asia. So Japan kind of had a lot of absorption of Western art, like Impressionism, Realism, a lot of that into their own language, their own vocabulary. So in turn, they influenced the Chinese artists who studied abroad in Japan. So Mr. Gao, one of the founders, while studying art in Japan, also became associated with the alliance formed by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was the founder of modern Republic of China. So while joining the movement, Gao had similar attitude that revolutionary art in near modern China. So basically, I talked a lot about this being free, drawing foreign ideas. On the other hand, his students' earlier work were influenced by Japanese art, both himself and his students. This gives a unique blend. So it's the first layer of the Chinese tradition of painting, which is thousands of years, and then some Japanese influence where Japanese drew a lot of Western taste as well as their own Japanese taste. So this is like a tri-source type of influence here. Yeah. While another layer I would say is the region of Canton is unique in its own. It is very hot, very tropical. It has a really unique flavor in compared to northern China or middle China. So basically, this is a very exotic style in my opinion. While Gao supported political movement with Sun Yat-sen, he was given a high position in the new government in Guangzhou. However, he felt this was not his call. He was not as interested in politics. He knew he wanted to continue his career teaching. Later, he founded the Chunshui Huayuan, a school of Guangzhou that supported his team's philosophy. So after he returned to Guangzhou, instead of becoming a politician, he generated a learning round where he has accepted a lot of students and disciples. While his brother Gao Qifeng, who also became an important of art in many disciplines, who is also well known. So basically, the brother just kind of expanded in various directions as well. So today, the Lingnan School is already passed on to the 5th generation of art. So right now, the 3 are first generation, later are the 2nd generation, the 3rd, the 4th. So it passes on and on. And each generation kind of changes following the influences and characteristics of their times. Okay, so enough of all that talk and background. Here are some Japanese painting around the same time period. As you can see, Japan itself has already gotten so much influence of, various type of culture. So basically, Japanese artists always drew China as the source of things, of techniques, of learning, of philosophies. And at the same time, they have their own aesthetical taste, as well as drawing a lot of European and American influences in their painting. So this really has a feel of perspectives, a feel of watercolor, oil painting, the kind of like three-dimensional object quality in some of this. At the same time, it also expresses some of the unique quality of the Japanese print. So Japanese print also drew their source from Chinese printmaking in the earlier days, although they really favored this art medium and kind of developed it a little differently. So these 3 artists, they studied in Japan. They drew a lot of influence from the Japanese artists from the era of Kyoto in Japan, which was the ancient capital of Japan. So I think this really kind of shows in their art. So among this KIA Ink Rhapsody exhibition, we will see a lot of art of Gao Jianfu. I did not personally see a lot of painting, but a lot of calligraphy by him. He was the 1st generation founder. He specializes in animals, plants, landscape. He is the quote-unquote principal. His art really gives a lot of hints of Japanese school painting he learned from. He also drew traditional from Chinese painters of the past. So some of his line work, brushstrokes, use of shapes, dryness, wetness of the brush, this really reflects a lot of Japanese school of Kyoto art at that time. Yeah, this needs explanation in detail, but for now, I just want to point out that there is certainly that influence there from overseas. So here's our few more really great paintings by Gao Jianfu. As you can tell, he paints the tiger really well anatomically, and there's this drastic contrast of line work of the darkness, lightness. And in comparison to Chinese painting, I would say the style really has a more strong, bold touch to it. It's just very different. So the difference between Chinese painting and Japanese painting is we focus a lot more on the atmospheric feel of the paintings, whereas they play that kind of energy in their work, like the line, the striking force of the line work, that type of work, it's a really different appeal. So Mr. Gao has a little bit of both in there. Another, I would say more than one figure, so here are the disciples of the first generation. So Zhao Shaowang, he's a second generation, a master of bird painting. He was working on a freeing manner that appears deliberate, but is highly controlled with attention to realistic structure, such as the correct form of botanical objects and anatomically correct approach to birds and insects. And a lot of energy is focused on the sketch motion of the object. If you heard the word sumi, really it's a matter of the ink brushstroke, which is a very abstract way of dealing with the subjects. So his works are very lively and vivid, giving a calligraphical movement and motion. So this man here, he's my teacher's teacher. So there's that correlation there, and I feel like I'm very appreciative of his art, and he's really greatly contributed in generating a lot of new artistic styles and philosophies. So Yang Shanshen, another artist, where you see in this exhibition downstairs, he's a second generation of school and specializes in still life of plants, animals, landscape. He uses strikingly bold lines and vibrant colors seen in modern art. So from my perspective, I feel he has a lot of modern art in his paintings. He also studied in Japan as well, but he, I think, lived in later time, and his painting has a vibrant color vary from the traditional limited palette by adding modern flavoring, which is still very Chinese, but they have some exotic quality which you can see in modern Western painting, Western art of last century. So I know that Joy is really fond of him, and this is Mr. Yang Shanshen. So this is Zhao Shaowang's work, the teacher I was mentioning, who was my teacher's teacher. So this is what I was mentioning, very abstract bold lines with calligraphy's approach in it. So a lot of 写意, freestyle paint brushes. So to achieve this level of free form, they're also very good with their realistic understanding of the shapes. So there's a lot of freeing extraction of the essential forms, shapes. And he paints a lot of these little animals and plants. I mean, that's one of his major areas of chosen subjects. So this really has a modern appeal in comparison to the previous one. So this one is Yang Shanshen, whom I mentioned has a expanded palette, the artistic approach. Just look at it, line work. It is so bold. It is so striking. Feels like an iron line. Sometimes he uses heavy, thick ink. Sometimes he uses these kind of meticulous lines, and it even have a higher realism effect here. So it's a really great play of textural elements, different use of line work. Sometimes they use just bold line without line work, called boneless. Sometimes they do use some very interesting line work here. So this man is very special to me. So he's my teacher. He's called Andy Huixiu Chan. So he's a third generation. He's a student of the abstract painter Zhao Shaowang. So this is his teacher. So Andy, many of those are living in Hong Kong or Guangzhou or Taiwan in Asia. So Andy found his home base in Chicago some past 40 years ago. He spent a great amount of energy teaching to Americans. He was trained in Western art in Vancouver, Canada first, and disciple to Zhao Shaowang while living in Hong Kong. He was very influential in Chicago area and cultivated as well to help bridge the communities and subgroups through art. So he really was actively involved in the American community in Chicago area and Midwest. He specialized similar objects of animals, plants, and various floral insect paintings. So basically, his background is Western painting, but he mentioned to me, he realized after living some decades in America, he wants to devote fully to Chinese painting and teaching. So here are some of his recent photos here. So tiger is one of his favorite subjects among many traditional artists in China. He does these really humongous tiger paintings that has a lot of energy, a lot of basic burst of energy and strength. So here's him with a tiger somewhere just to kind of feel the animal in close. Here's him and me is teaching me some bamboo painting techniques, and he does it every single day for hours and hours. Here's some interaction with the local community in Chicago area. So this man really spread Chinese art a lot in Midwestern region. So this is another disciple of Zhao Shaoang, who is sort of like called a classmate of my teacher, Andy. So this guy really, what he does is he is notable for atmosphere paintings of landscape, Chinese poetry, bird and flower, especially eagles and tigers. He's a really good friend of Andy Chan, who lived in America, and their friendship lasted until last year when both this gentleman and my teacher passed away, last year in the same year, which is for me a really big loss. He taught in Taiwan. He's a professor of painting in Taiwan. So here's some of his paintings. So in his painting, you can see there's a lot of traditional subjects, and the atmospheric background is highly rendered in these objects. They're simplified, and they reveal Mr. Zhao Shaoang's abstraction in painting, while there's a really strong air of freedom, free-flowing energy in these paintings, which I really love. Strong contrast of wetness, dryness, different brush strokes. Is really definitely one of the most atmospheric landscape painters. More of his paintings here. So more of this snow scenes, mountains, tall mountains in China, and then some horses, tigers, everything just had that next level of freedom, I think. So summary, the art of Lingnan School in southern China truly brought revolution and made the connection of traditional China to a multitude of aesthetic value in China abroad. Its influence is beyond the art itself. It bridged the late Qing dynasty, which is opening to the foreign countries and early republic with art of Europe, America, and other sources. It encouraged artists to draw creative ideas and techniques freely with a focus on the study of life. So they really have good background in learning the anatomy to understand basic realism, which is the foundation. At the same time, they have re-emphasized the value of traditional Chinese painting. So by living abroad for many years, they've re-evaluated the uniqueness of Chinese traditional art. So if there's any questions or anything, you can ask me. And then there's a very good cultural background site, which is all this in much more depth than that taught here. So it's called lingnanart.com. You can see that online. So if you have any questions, you can ask me about history, techniques, cultural implications, social influences. And last, I want to thank you. You can ask me questions after this. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. So my name is Julia. Here's my email, cwangart@gmail. There's my own personal website. So you can reach me sometimes in community events and teaching, either at the KIA or some other places. There will be workshops by KIA. I think you can see all that in the website. So yeah, really thank you for coming and listening to me talking about the background and history of this wonderful school of art, which I really find a lot of inspiration of. Yeah. Yes. Good.